Huge thank you for everybody for waiting this evening for Anneke Lucas. And some of you may be familiar with her when she was on the channel years ago. But I know a lot of you are new to the channel, and we're going to be going over Anneke's story again and, finding out about her activism and her book. And if you do want to support Anneke's work, you can go to her channel, you can go to the website. All the links are in the description box below the video. She's also on Instagram and X. For those not familiar, then I'll just describe a little bit. So Anneke dives into shocking allegations surrounding global networks, human transportation, and powerful elites. She has a harrowing story, so viewer discretion is advised. Detailing claims of SA manipulation, mind control within a hidden dark system. She sheds light on the disturbing realities of missing kids, corruption, and the complex psychology of healing after unimaginable trauma. And with names of prominent figures woven into her account, she reveals a chilling perspective on the shadowy connections between wealth, power, and exploitation. And because we've got, since I spoke to you last, the police have put a restriction on my channel now, Anneke, whereby I've got to make sure that you give us permission to publish your story and you waive your anonymity.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's go back to the very beginning then. What was it like for you growing up, and where did you grow up?
Yes, and I just want to say it's the strangest live ever because I'm here. So I thought we were going to sit together, but so I'm sitting in your house, and I guess I'm upstairs, you're downstairs. Is that what it is? Upstairs, downstairs? So anyway, nice to visit you, and hello, and nice to meet you in person. So
Thank you. You too.
yeah, so I'll try to share my story, and I'll try to watch a little bit the language that I use for that. So I was born in Belgium in 1963, and my mother was single, and she had me. You could say at the very least that she's mentally unwell, and I was abused very early on, and at age 6, very strange things started to happen, that I was being placed in situations where I could have died. And it looked like there was organization around it. So right from the very first time that I was taken to, an event, it was extreme and absolutely shocking, extreme. And it was immediately followed by threats, extreme threats and it was also immediately shown that those threats were not idle. So if I were to say anything, and for 3 years, I was in this Belgian, what I call a club, really. And that did involve people that I didn't know who they were then, but I realized later who they were. And the guy that was really running the whole operation there was the then Minister of National Defense, and he was also Prime Minister twice in Belgium. And, the children were used mostly for political and business blackmail. So you could say that it was a club and people were coming from different avenues, but at that time, from 3 to 9 or from 69 to 72, the only people I've ever recognized were either politicians, or they were in government, governmental posts, or they were police, or they were judges, lawyers, doctors, and so forth. Or they were, in large part, were also nobility. And so there was a separation then between what I believe were the nobility that were bringing their own children to events. And clearly there's a culture that where CA seems to be very normalized in that culture. And I was used to, people were getting into that and then were triaged. And I was mostly used in those first years for supposedly helping the newcomers feel at ease. And then I had to service them and make them feel comfortable, but get them to a room and then position them even so that they would be filmed in secret. And then they obviously were completely in the pocket of the prime minister and whoever else was involved that I wasn't really necessarily aware of at the time. So I was also sometimes given to someone from the nobility that might be extremely sadistic and might be, not know that I was going to survive any given time. And it would not be, I wouldn't call it RA at that time, even though the same things were maybe done, but it was just extreme sadism, So, and in those first 3 years, I was always treated as the lowest of the low. And personally, my freedom was that I knew that they were wrong. And then at 9 years old, there was the Bilderberg meeting happened in Belgium in that year in Knokke-le-Zoet. And one of those attendants was somebody that the Belgians really wanted to please and wanted to do business with. And for this person they set up what really is it was a ritual that was set up in his honor. And so that ritual was horrific, and it has all the elements that are usually described by other survivors as well. And one a little boy was killed in that event at that time. And then through completely extraordinary circumstances that really, I say, would have nothing to do with me. It was really beyond myself. I was then, I was actually picked by that billionaire who then decided he was going to make me his slave. And so for 1 year, I was being prepared to be an elite slave. And so I spent, this is several months later. The Bilderberg meeting was around April. And then several months later, I was flown on a private jet to the United States. I was in the homes of this man. I didn't realize, but he was triaging me. He was just checking out what are my gifts, what are my talents, what am I good at, and also trained sexually. And then a month later, I was sent to, I call it official mind control training, which happened in Heidelberg in Germany and was led by a doctor that was found out to be a Nazi before. And this doctor knew very well how to torture and get results based on the trauma, from the trauma resulting from the torture. And I was myself impressed at how efficient and precise these methods were. And also, I noticed myself change quite a bit. And I noticed myself losing the distance I'd had before, where I knew that the men were wrong, as I was being turned into a persona with the help of many drugs and the help of that mind control training, and with the help of a lot of praise and a lot of promises, because now I belonged. But before I did definitely not belong, and now suddenly I did belong, and I was going to belong. And at first, I was very happy, but I have to say that it was actually very difficult, because the pressure was unbearable. The pressure of having to obey, not having the freedom of thought, and feeling, you know, pressured into thinking that I was very lucky when there was no room for any thoughts other than that. And I rebelled after 1 year when I was already presented on the inside. I was already presented. I was already in, there was already had been a ritual to induce me into this cult, you could say. And I, after that, the rebellion, I have to say, was very slight. It was very small, but it was enough because it's sort of a terrorist organization. You cannot not obey. So there was just one slight thing that I didn't obey, and I ended up being ejected. It was also, I should maybe specify that because of the role that I was being prepared for, it was very important that I do this, that I do everything out of my own free will. And, there are victims of this club that are not really doing this of their own free will. They are coerced. And even in adulthood, there are people that are coerced. And they needed to make sure that I wasn't, that I really wanted it. So you have to want it badly enough, And that's what was lacking. I was still coerced. And while I was doing a lot to make it seem that I wasn't, because I had to obey, it was noticed that I was not really completely on board. And then I was tested. And when I rebelled during this test, really, I went through a very different kind of program, which was to make sure that I would fail in life, that I would feel completely worthless, that I would never have any success. And so I got the opposite programming from what I received a year long. In a very short while, everything was destroyed, and I felt utterly broken, and was then sent back to Belgian network. And my book begins then, after this all already happened. And then you'll find, I'm basically starting when I was 10 years old, and it's the last year that I spent inside the Belgian network, where the Belgians were not really told what had happened. And I spent another year and was ultimately rescued by someone from the inside, a gangster, who ended up abusing me maybe worse than anyone else. And then when it was my time to be discarded, he had a last minute change of heart, and then negotiated to get me out. And at 11 years old, I was put out of the network.
Wow. Well, it's just mind blowing, especially for people who are hearing that you were taken at age 6 and immediately put into extreme trauma. Do you think the purpose of that extreme trauma was just to make you conform right away? You would be terrified if you went against these people?
I don't think it was that thought out. I was groomed by pimps that were, the woman came to clean our house, and I was taken, they were babysitting for a year already. And they made sure that my mother and my stepfather would be completely on board, would not suspect anything. And then before that first event they took me to, the husband then raped me violently, and the woman yelled at me. And so that was the preparation. That was their preparation. It was quite brutish. And then the event, I don't know if it happened to be something extreme that day or not, but it seemed like it I was not the only child that was presented there. There were a few other girls, and then the husband, the woman wasn't there. And then I don't know where the other girls went, but I was, in a sort of an S&M show on a stage in a castle with this man. So I was extremely humiliated, and I was also absolutely shocked. And I did speak out that time. The event was a sort of a mass ball. Everybody was dressed like hippies, but I could tell that they weren't hippies. There was hippie music playing, Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. That music was playing, but everybody was was dressed as hippies, while there were very formal type waiters coming round with silver platters with drugs on them for everyone to take. And so people were extremely high, and that was the show. And I was absolutely shocked. And at the end, actually stood up and told them that they couldn't do this, that I would go tell on them, that they would all go to jail. And then I was taken by a handler and shown. I mean, it was taken for a walk, really, even to another place, and then taken into a cellar, and then long walk and into the cellar to be shown a body of a young woman.
And how old were you at that point, Anneke?
That was the first time I was taken. This was around my 6th birthday.
And the trauma of seeing a body. I mean, what's going in your mind? Are you thinking that you could be next?
Well, he was also saying very casually that, they really like me and they wouldn't want anything to happen to me, while, pretending that the body was not even, a person, had been a person. And so it was clear enough. It has to do with speaking up. We won't want anything to happen to you. And I had said that I was going to tell on them, and I told them I'm going to tell my father, who was my stepfather. And so then I tried to tell my mother, actually. I mean, I didn't have any words for anything that had happened, but I tried to say that I think I said that bad things had happened. And then my mother ended up taking over from that couple.
So you've got a few questions coming in about your mother and how it got to this place. Could you just go back a little bit and describe what was your, relationship like with your mother before all this, and how did it go into this?
Well, my mother had abused me from when I was very young. And so I have recovered memories from when I was very, very young, the first month. And then, in fact, possibly because of that abuse, had a severe asthma attacks and was in the hospital for weeks. But I do have memories of the abuse. I mean, they were very strongly in the body because I was so young. So they were body memories that came in through the body. Very difficult and painful. And being with my mother was very, very difficult because there was not a single part of me that was authentic, that was reflected by her. She only saw in me what she needed to see outside of herself, which was either powerful and evil, including as a baby, or I was bad, or then I was bad and powerful, or else I was a sort of a bland, weak, ugly girl, and she went over the list every day of all the things that were physically wrong with me, and or it was really physical in terms of beauty. So yellow teeth, fat ankles, and thin hair, and so there was this whole list of things that weren't true necessarily, but so that's her mental illness. It wasn't even real, but she said it so often that I definitely believed that until well into adulthood, that I had, for example, fat ankles. Or she had a story about why my teeth were yellow, which was clearly made up. But I didn't know that. So it was very, very difficult to live with her. And, this may sound very strange, but the truth is that once I started being taken into the network, some of these perpetrators were actually better. They saw something in me that she didn't. So especially the billionaire, the American billionaire, when he took an interest when I was 9, he became a father figure, because as he was triaging me, which of course I didn't realize, he was also seeing things in me that no one had ever seen and reflected. So I felt I was developmentally receiving things I needed,
I mean,
it was
that's got to be really harrowing for people to hear that these people were seeing these things in you that your own mother wasn't seeing in you. Did you research or find out what your mother had been through that led her to this place in life?
Well, she was very secretive, but she was born in 39, and her father was in a concentration camp as a prisoner of war. And I know that her little niece that she was with during the war years died. The niece was 4 and she was 3, and then her mother died when she was 5, and she certainly acted like a 5-year-old girl, a sexualized 5-year-old girl. So it seemed that she was mentally arrested definitely at that age. And she never talked about sexual abuse, but the way she acted, it seemed like that was completely suppressed. And somehow the mother who then died had to become idealized. So her mother could never do anything wrong, but all other women, and me especially, she had something negative to say about. So it was very black and white. Her mother was good, all other women were bad. And she flirted with every man she saw. She had a sort of a childish, flirtatious way, which is really weird. But it seemed that the people, were talking 60s, 70s, maybe different time too, that, that it was not really perceived, or she certainly was never diagnosed.
And did you learn the history of your birth father?
Oh, yes, I did. I mean, that was basically a one-night stand with my mother. And he's also dead now, a composer of classical music. Is my mother, when she became pregnant, was working for the National Radio and Television Station as a secretary or stenographer, really. And she loved working for men, and she loved to work, and in service of men. And she called him to say she was pregnant, and he offered an abortion. And then I never knew of him or met him, but it seems that she told the network who he was, and he came from a family. So I met him when I was 18. That's a whole other story, but he told me that he came from the family Gaillard de Kerbertin, a noble family from Brittany in France. And I think that the network knew that they were Huguenots that fled to Holland. And that was his mother's side. And I think that that's what the network picked up on. And also the fact that he was a composer of classical music, and that this was a family of artists, of especially musically, that this is the reason that once I was in that global network and the persona was going to be created, that they were going to turn me into a singer actress. So I was going to, you know, they knew, it seems that they knew about my bloodline, that whereas I was completely ignorant of it.
Yeah, just before I met you this evening, I was listening to your interview with Alandra Markman, and it got to the point where you're talking about the bloodlines and how these networks research that and select certain bloodlines. Could you expand on that, please?
Not much, because I don't really know how it works. I kind of stick to my experience, but I never understood why after I rebelled, I wasn't killed. That would have been much simpler to make sure I was never going to talk. Instead, I received days and days and days of torturous programming to make sure that I would kind of die young, maybe, become a drug addicted prostitute and just die that way, disappear, discard programming. And I didn't understand why I just hadn't been killed. And there's actually Fiona Barnett, another survivor, who told me that that they're less likely to kill someone if they're in the bloodline. And that bloodline, again, I don't know much about it because I didn't know my father very well either. I just know that they were the nobility, and that means they were somewhere at some point either bought a title or were related to one of the royalty. And that's the system, I guess. It comes from either one prominent person or some type of royalty.
So, as did you say you started? This started at 6, and when did it end?
Well, I was rescued at 11.
11. So this went on for like 5 years. And did you described seeing one person unalived? Were there multiple over those years that you saw people that they'd done that too?
Yes.
And you said that you mentioned the Bilderberg, and one of the viewers is asking, do you think that the participants in the Bilderberg are evil?
I know that there was a lot to do around the Bilderberg meeting being in Belgium, and that the people in this particular club were very excited. And I'm sure that the event that where I was gifted together with another child who didn't make it, I'm sure that there were a lot of other events organized around that time as well. So that's what I can say. And just the fact that it's completely secret, and yet we know that decisions are made during these meetings that have impact on everybody. And so I think that in itself is something to be questioned.
Would you say that you got through it by perhaps making alliances with certain people?
No, I didn't get through it, on my own accord. I could have just as easily not made it. There's nothing that makes you special or anything like that, It's just whatever is meant to happen for you. I did have something that helped me to heal eventually, which I think is something that I noticed in a lot of survivors, that there was just something that I was just never 100% in. And I think, some children are 100% in and they still end up not surviving. And whereas, you just don't know. It depends on status within the group, definitely. And there are children that, normally is you cannot generalize it, but the children that are born into it, which is most of the survivors that I currently work with were born into a group like that, into the cult. They would not be selected, but that doesn't mean they survive it. Also, it's tricky because they certainly go through a lot and they're put through a lot.
So you mentioned, your mum's involvement when you were taken. How did your relationship with your mum evolve over those years?
Um, so my mother was very ill, so that there were certain things, her denial was so thick that like she saw herself as a good mother and as an innocent person. So anything that was wrong with me didn't exist, in spite of the obvious. So I may come back from an event full of bruises. And so my mother will suddenly make up a story. Like one story that I described in my book was that I ran into the swing in the backyard while my brother was swinging. And I ran into it and I got it on my face, and then I got this huge bruise. And she made that up and then told people in front of me that that happened because people were shocked to see me. So she made it up, and then she involved my little brother in it too. Then he started saying it. And so I described this in the book because at some point I was questioning if it had happened or not. So when I was rescued, I was covered in scabs from torture. And so for my mother, she acted like they never existed. They didn't exist. But I also I did stay home from school. And if she did want to take me out, I had to wear tights and long sleeves. So I confronted her then. I was aware then. And I didn't fight, I was fighting her at that time. And she was so adamant at not allowing anything to enter that has to do with her having a conscience and allowing in something that she might have done wrong, that she just did everything to overpower me again. So she tried many things. She tried to strangle me. She got me back to an event behind the backs of the bosses to be abused again. She eventually she did more, but eventually she then she molested me, and that did it. That I felt so much shame from this. I was 11 years old, and I felt so incredible. All the shame that she had never felt, I think I felt it then. I felt so ashamed. I was like completely, then I gave in to her, which was that in her world and in her environment, there was no room for anything that she could have done wrong. So there was really nothing wrong with me. We were normal. I was normal. I had a normal childhood, and I had to submit. And that's what happened.
What were the circumstances of her trying to strangle you?
She was trying to, so this is in the weeks after at my rescue, when I had these wounds and I was at home with her. And she was trying to get me to wear long sleeves, and I spoke back to her, and I confronted her with what had happened, and I told her that she wasn't going to get any more calls because that's how it had worked before. She received calls, and then she would go and drop me off and pick me up at dawn usually. And I told her she wasn't going to receive any more calls. And it was about, she wanted to take me out, and I didn't want to wear what she was giving me to wear, which was a shirt with long sleeves. And so it was that. It was in my bedroom, where she just came at me and to the inbuilt closet and just pushed me against it with her thumbs and pushed hard until I almost fainted and I fell down. Then she let go and then she just threw the shirt at me and just as if nothing had happened, said, "Here, just put that on. We're leaving."
Okay, you mentioned school. So when you were in school, because of what you were going through, was it impossible to make friends? And were you ever tempted to like reach out to a teacher or another figure and just say, look, here's what's happening to me?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to understand the level of shame that I lived with because I was called a prostitute at 6. So that's what I believed I was. And I felt such shame. And every act of that type of abuse really is about energetically dumping shame. So I felt, yes, I was very shy, but also I was also dissociated. So it wasn't justice. I don't think that I could have lived with the shame of that reality and then also shown my face. It was too great. So, the dissociation is also just a natural survival um, with such trauma. So I did not have conscious awareness when I was in school. When I did have conscious awareness, I had tremendous shame. And I had in between states, like my mother would give me a sign and then I would know to get ready. And so there were in between states because I had what I call my mother's girl, who was very submissive and bland and ugly and so forth. And then I prepared by just going to the bathroom and looking in the mirror and just getting ready, sort of becoming still inside and, preparing for, other types of projection, I guess, but um, without full consciousness. But then when my mother drove me to these events, again, she was so much in denial that this was a time that didn't really exist because she was now driving me to a harmful event. So for her, it was not even existing. So there was no talking because it wasn't happening. And that was the message, kind of like, this is not happening. This is out of time. This is not even happening. So there too, it makes for her own particular sickness, made for a lot of my own. As soon as I came home, I was in her mental environment where nothing had happened. So that's anyway what I needed to survive in the home. So it was helping for going to school as well.
What about like doctor's appointments or anything like that? Was there any opportunities there to raise an alarm?
No, the doctor that came to our home was writing notes for my mother, often sick notes, when I had been away longer than usual. And then, I did also have a lot of bronchitis and issues around the asthma, but um, not really asthma anymore, only when I was a toddler and a baby and toddler. But then I had bronchitis, I would get things, but mostly that doctor would just come and just talk to her, and then she would get a note that I had the flu. And I don't know if he was part of this at all, but he just seemed very disinterested. He barely looked at me. My mother really liked him. And so that was one thing. And then, yeah, I remember one school exam, for example, and this doctor was very aggressive. And I just remember him because he had the vibration of these kinds of men anyway. So I remember that. But it was very perfunctory and I felt dirty. I remember that. But it's not someone that would have called for an alarm at all. And also have to know that in this group, I was being told very often that anybody I would ever talk to, or anybody that would try to help me, they would find out who it was, and it would come back to them. And not only I would get punished, but they would get punished. So, and I believe that those were not idle threats either, because the people that were involved were high placed. Yeah, there was a bishop involved. I mean, again, I didn't know who these people were, but I knew enough to know that they were important in the world or the government, and that, yeah, I really wouldn't be able to get anywhere. I was very afraid of the police, for example. And because the head of the police was participating, I recognized the head of police later on.
So, how old are you when your stepfather came into your life, and what was his role in this?
So I was 3 when my mother married, and then we moved to this place in the Flanders. And then soon after, I believe that we were targeted. So again, this woman came to work for us when she was 5, but I think it was after we were already targeted. And my mother had the profile, and my stepfather was away a lot. He was a cameraman for television. So he was traveling a whole lot, and then he was also mayor of the town. And both my parents came from the working class, and my stepfather had fought in the Second World War, and my mother was a child in it, and then had her own damage. And they really loved the fact that they were well off, and they really liked to climb. They really liked to think they were very important, and they liked to boast about their relative wealth, which is very modest, but it was better than how they started out. And so they were extremely arrogant, both of them, and boasting and blind. And my stepfather really didn't want to know. He went along because he was not my father, which again, I didn't know this, but I always felt that he didn't care. And it was clear that he really just, my mother, whatever my mother said, he was going to buy. So very often when there was an issue, my mother would just tell him something, and before I even had a chance. And one time when my mother had left me after an event, left me to starve really in a house as her punishment for 5 days, she had told my stepfather that I had ran away. I was 10 or 11, that I had ran away, and that I had spent the 5 days with a wealthy family. And my stepfather accepted that, and I tried to tell him that it wasn't true, that I had nothing to eat, that bad things had happened, and he didn't believe me, because he was going to believe whatever she told him.
So we've had a few people in the chat asking about if there's any documentation of this network in Belgium. And something that I'm familiar with is the Marc Dutroux case. And
Yes.
in this case, I mean, even the Guardian did an article on it where Dutroux insists he was part of a network. He was not a lone wolf, but he was part of a wider ring, and he was convicted of R-wording and unaliving 4 little girls. And what do you know about Dutroux and his links to this network?
Well, that case was international news in 1996 when it came out. So I left the country in 1981, and so I didn't really know anything. But I read about this case in the New York Times, and by the time I read about it, it was already clear that the case was going to be sabotaged, because initially 4 bodies of the girls were found, and 2 girls were rescued from his dungeons. And there was a judge appointed to deal with this case that was very passionate and promised the people he would get to the bottom of this. And he was taken off the case very soon, a pretext that was rather ridiculous. And so people marched in protest, and 300,000 people marched through the streets of Brussels, which was called the White Marches, to protest the corruption, because everyone was so upset about the little girls that Marc Dutroux had gone to kidnap, which was different from the way maybe other pimps for this club would work. They wouldn't really do that. They would infiltrate into families the way that this couple had done with our family, and then eventually start taking the children. And these parents were looking for their children. And Marc Dutroux, when he was captured, said that he was just one small chain in on a huge wheel, and that, you know, he had friends in high places that would certainly protect him. And, you know, he's only 7 years older than me, so I never saw Marc Dutroux. But one of the defendants in that case was a man named Michel Nihoul. And Michel Nihoul, I saw when I was 10, 11, he started to have a role in this, in the network. He started to do everything. He was the middle person. He was arranging everything. He was doing everything to please what you can call the big shots. And he was a sort of a very shady businessman. And he was extremely psychopathic. Like that was a person who had no sense of anything. He was extremely careless and did the most atrocious and grotesque and violent things without any second thought. Now, he was one of the defendants in the case because he had been involved apparently in the kidnappings of these children. And he'd been, you know, in touch with Marc Dutroux around these kidnappings. So then so this is 1996, Marc Dutroux was caught. His wife was caught, a small junkie who had been helping him with the kidnappings was caught. And then Michel Nihoul was caught. Then 8 years went by before this became a trial. And in those 8 years, you know, there's a journalist that did deep research and wrote a book about the 30 witnesses that would not testify at the Dutroux trial. And that was because these were people that had evidence about the existence of the larger network rather than that it was just Marc Dutroux. And they all died in mysterious circumstances, or suicide, or strange accidents, or they were just, murdered. So when the case came, finally, you know, there was several survivors came forward, not me. Right, I did not come forward because I wasn't ready. And the Dutroux case itself gave me a validation for what I had been remembering for 10 years, but had not found a therapist to help me with. So I was really, you know, just beginning to allow everything to sink in, and I didn't feel ready at all. And I already knew it. Again, I learned about the case when it was clear that it was already getting sabotaged, because this judge had been fired and was then replaced by people, you know, apparently that had some other ideas. But in the beginning, survivors had also come forward. And so those survivors gave testimony, and the original team of police that were investigating were finding a lot of that these testimonies were valid. And one of these members of that police team, his name is Michel Clip. he, okay, so anyway, I'll tell the story that the original police team was fired, or they were put on leave for a supposed mistake they made, which, 24 hours later was proven to be false, except that they remained on leave and they were replaced by another team. And that team was extremely suspicious from the get-go of the testimonies, and then wrote reports that really changed things around from the testimony. So several of the members of the original team continued kind of, especially Michelle Klipp, who was the one who went and took the information and then went and tested it out, like details given, of this place and that long a drive. And, he would put his ruler on the maps and go look to see where to these places that were described. And he found a lot of validation for what was being said, especially description of places that people really were not supposed to know. And another thing was that there were the same perpetrators were being pointed to. And when I talked to Michel Klipp, he sent me loads of photos, and I just pointed, very simply, just pointed to the pictures. And I think it was a mix of pictures of people that were actually involved and others not at all. And he, likened what I told him and what I showed to one of the ex-testimonies, very close to someone that was closer to my age, but who actually ended her life. And so he's also validated my story, but I, never would have come forward in this case. And then I saw, so after 2 years, so 98, we're talking now, it was already clear that those testimonies were of those survivors and others that had testified, which were called the testimonies, that they were not going to be used. And what happened then is some journalists brought out the testimonies in the newspapers. And so it became a huge controversy in the country. And soon the country was divided between believers and disbelievers. And so believers were the naive, supposedly naive people who believed the survivors. And the disbelievers were the people who strangely believed the official narrative. The indoctrination was very strong in Belgium after the Dutroux case, because after Marc Dutroux went to prison in 2004, the whole thing was repressed again in the country. And what I was speaking to is that those ex-witnesses were so reviled, and they were treated so badly and so familiarly to this unbelievable disrespect, that I also saw that and knew that I can't speak until I'm ready to sort of take the attacks and deal with them.
Yeah, so people in the chat who are wondering about actual investigative documentation on the Belgium network, I've just put the Dutroux wiki page link in the live chat, and I've also put it in the description box if you want to do a deep dive on that. But I'll just read a couple of paragraphs just so you can get an idea, because this does confirm these, the existence of this ring. Belief in the network, which included high-ranking members, that's the also thing, it's an elite network. High-ranking members of the Belgium establishment became widespread in Belgium. Press reports claim that prior to his removal, Conneret was on the verge of publicly disclosing the names of high-level government officials who had been recognized on videotapes. This is in the Dutroux case. Conneret said that the businessman, Michael Nihul, was the brains behind child kidnapping and would testify in the trial that there had been high-level unaliving plots to stop his investigation. Investigators also believed that Dutroux and Nihul were planning on a long-distance transportation network involving cars and the importation of girls from Slovakia. Dutroux and his fellow accused supported this narrative. Michael, the accomplice of Dutroux, said that the two girls were kidnapped as an order by a third party, but then while under arrest, he stopped cooperating with the authorities. He told police that he'd been threatened and could not risk saying any more. Dutroux's lawyer said during trial proceedings, I speak not only as a lawyer, but also as a citizen and a father. He was not only the devil. Out of the 6,000 hair samples that were found in the basement cellar, where some of the victims were held, 25 unknown DNA profiles were discovered. 25 more people. There were people in that cellar that are now accused. But guess what? The prosecution never attempted to match those DNA profiles to people implicated in the case. And then they also looked at the wealth of Dutroux. He owned 10 houses. He was worth 6 million Belgian francs. He had all his wealth in property. And while he had all this wealth, he was also receiving public assistance of 1,200 a month. Documents released by WikiLeaks show that large sums of money in different currencies arrived in Michel Martin's bank account and claimed to be linked in time to the disappearances of the abducted girls. Transfers and the value of the 6 properties that Dutroux owned suggested to investigators that he was financed by a larger ring. The Flemish newspaper reported that he had committed health insurance fraud, theft, and these had also contributed to his wealth. An undated letter was found in a house belonging to Bernard Weinstein mentioning a gift for the high priestess. The note was signed Anubis. A member of the Abraxas cult used the same alias, leading police to conduct the raid on the cult headquarters by 150 officers, taking away much of the cult's paraphernalia. So this just gets crazier and crazier the more you read it. And it is absolutely documented by the authorities that these people, these elites, are heavily involved in this network. So Anneke, then, earlier on you said you didn't know how famous these people were at the time, how powerful they were at the time. At what point did you realize these people were from the top of society?
Well, that took a long while. You call him Michael Nihul. Well, that's the person I mentioned earlier, one of the defendants in the case. And then just to clarify, Michel Martin was the wife of Marc Dutroux. So these payments that were coming into her bank accounts, these large payments coming into his and her bank accounts, were following disappearances of children that were missing. And right after their disappearances, there were these large amounts of money deposited in both his and his wife's account. Yeah, so that was what you were reading there. I'm sorry, your question again?
My question was, at the time, you didn't know these people in the network.
Oh, yeah. When did I know?
Yeah, when did you realize who they were from the top of society?
Well, the Dutroux case immediately made some things clear, and very soon after, I immediately recognized the Belgian perpetrators, such as Michel Nihul, but also Paul van den Boeynants, who was the then minister. He was prime minister twice, but he was then, at the time that I was there, he was a minister of national defense. But then for the other men, I would get a memory. For example, somebody would ask me, I was trained, in my training, I was also trained to report. So I was not only a slave, but I was also meant to spy. And then I was reporting, and I had a reporter part. So the reporter part answers questions. So when people were asking me questions, I would just answer them. And then I would just Google them. And I was always stunned, politician from that country with this first name, or not even a first name, and boom, the picture would show up right away. It was astounding. I was completely flabbergasted that these people were that powerful, because I saw, of course, a very different side to them. And, I did not see them as these big, powerful people.
And that includes royalty, doesn't it? Because we've had this news today here in the UK, and it's gone worldwide, about Prince Andrew. In complete contradiction to what he said in his BBC interview now, an email was sent to Jeffrey saying, "Oh, we're in this together," and intimating that he was going to meet up with him again and do God knows what. All after he'd said on the BBC, he distanced himself from him. Jeffrey was convicted, and he was going over there to break up the friendship. And now this is the Queen's favourite son. So all this is out here. It's quite obvious, these royal family members, what they're getting involved in here. What's it like in Belgium with the royals there?
Yeah, it's weird that this is in the title, but all I will say is that, yes, the nobility and the royalty, I can't say too much about it, is the truth. Just staying safe. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it is an extremely dangerous avenue to go down. We had Andrew Loney on, who's really been doing a lot on Prince Andrew, and I imagine that he is under considerable pressure right now from the vested interests. So, when you went on Patrick Bet-David podcast, some big names were mentioned, and did you receive blowback for that?
Well, the only thing that happened is that after that interview, I've not had any requests from any. I was invited to that podcast, and then that podcast did really well. It has, it's one of his more popular videos, and it has tons of comments. Mostly not in his favor, but okay, 35,000 comments on that video, and since then it's been dead silent. So I've not had any invites since then, but I have had a few veiled threats to my life. Yeah.
Yeah, so Patrick Bet-David came to London, and I must have been like 5 or 6 years ago now, and I met with him, arranged some guests for him, and he's an absolute gentleman with me. We had really good rapport, really enjoyed the interview that I did with him, and it did well. But when I was watching him interview you, Anneke, it's like I've never seen him. He seemed a bit prickly. He seemed really out of sorts. I never saw him interview anyone quite like the way he interviewed you. What did you make of that?
Well, I didn't know what to make of it other than that I noticed that he didn't connect with me as a person before the interview. Some of the things that came out in the interview were definitely contrived because they just invited me. They didn't ask me to name anybody. There was nothing. I mean, there was a lot of confusion around that afterwards because he made it seem like this was an agreement we had, which was not at all. It was something that I had mentioned months earlier to his manager that he called into the room. But after I was already invited, that this might be an opportunity. And I had named Pierre Trudeau. And I thought that was a big, that's big. I'm naming a very big person. So the pressure of naming people was, but I didn't mind any of it, just to be clear. It did feel a little bit like I was in a boxing match for 2 hours, but I didn't mind. And I didn't really know how I did, at the end. I didn't really know if I won or not. I didn't really know how I'd done because the pressure was severe, and I figured, I have to stand up for myself because I don't want, to say something and then get it twisted. I'm not going to put words in. I'm not going to let him put words in my mouth that I didn't say. So I was defending myself. And at the end of it, I kind of didn't know how I'd done. It just felt like I'd been in a boxing match. And then I guess it was clear that I did all right. I held my own. And that's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to, I did notice him getting prickly more towards, it was as if he was trying to get something out of me that I wasn't giving him. And then he got annoyed. And I feel that there was something that he got more aggressive as the interview went on.
Yeah, I was really surprised, and I found it compulsively. I had to like watch it to see how this was gonna pan out. But Anneke, I mean, you've been through the depths of hell. You've come out of it with this like meditation, yoga person. You're like a rock of peace, tranquility, love, calmness. And for some podcast hosts to try and, you know, disrupt that frequency, it's just not going to happen because you're an authentic person, and all you do is you inspire survivors and spread love around the world. So to try and, you know, destabilize your foundation was just it was just not never going to happen.
Well, I think that was actually very good for the cause, frankly. The fact that I was put under pressure and that I did hold my own, and I think a lot of survivors got a lot of inspiration from it, and I was happy for that. Absolutely.
So I've been hugging you now for over an hour, and there's loads of viewer questions have come in. So viewers, this is your opportunity now. We are live with Anneke from my house. We've got almost 2,000 watching across all the platforms. And also, I'm going to put Anneke's YouTube channel. There's loads of interviews with survivors on that channel. I urge people to subscribe. And also the link for Anneke's website and the book as well, of course, The Quest for Love. So please support Anneke's work. Get the questions in now, folks. I know several questions have come in that I've already started, so I'll probably start with them. And let's see, Nicoletta. Anneke, how did you survive, and with what consequences are you living?
Is that consequences of the trauma that is meant? Because how did I survive? I already answered that in a way because I told you I don't. You know, how did I survive when I was a child? Well, that was by luck, I would say, or fate, whatever you want to call it, or meant to be. And the consequences was of tremendous trauma was that my every aspect of my life was completely impacted, and the 40-year long healing journey is just very gradually helped me to find myself, you could say. A long road to find myself and who I really am, who I am. I'm not the shameful, worthless creature. I'm not the persona. And who I am. It's there's a lot of layers that have been peeled off to get to who where I am today, which I feel all right now. I feel aligned, and the consequences. I still get memories, for example, and I still have to work them. But today, these memories, and when I'm, it's more like a spiritual test now. Before I really regained what I would call is true self-esteem that comes from, being able to be alive and know that you're lovable just for being alive, and just feeling joy that comes from within. Before that, it was very, very, very difficult, and I suffered tremendously. um, just going through all these layers of all the feelings that had been repressed, all the reactions, all the reactions to all the hurt that was done. And that I was 49 years old, really, when I felt I finally was over the guilt complex, that I could finally begin to navigate. I have a compass now. I can just navigate my life from within. And that's also when I'm in public. I mean, I didn't mean to really go public. I didn't even mean any of this. But um, I was interviewed about my work in prisons then. And then, I got the question, what brings you there? And then I just, instead of avoiding the question or just skipping it, I answered it. And then that became the title of the article. And then I was just getting requests here and there, little venues, and then in 2016, a video went viral, and so I went from working in the prisons to working more and more with survivors. So I was also working with survivors in the prisons, but then I was working more and more with survivors. And even as I'm working with other people, there's this parallel processing going on, and I definitely still get memories, but I'm settled within myself as well. So it's more like any kind of spiritual test that any of us will go through when we have a hard time. How do we grow from that? So that's really what it is. There is more and more integration that happens, but it's adventurous and beautiful, even though it can be difficult. But it's not what it was before, when I was just suffering tremendously, trying to get through the day. There was 20 years there that it was just often very difficult to just even get out of bed, get myself to therapy, because that's what I was doing, going to therapy, going to yoga. It was just to keep myself going. It was very hard.
Yeah, and I would urge people to watch Anneke's TED Talk. It was one of the first things I watched that Anneke has done. All right, so Monterey, how big is the cult now? Is it declining or growing?
So I like to stay with my personal experiences. So I can't really answer that question. The only thing that I can say is that obviously nothing has been done to end any of this, really. Even though things are coming out, we know we're not getting to, Marc Dutroux was locked up as a lone perpetrator, as Epstein is dead now, but we don't have that list. So all I know is that nothing has been done to stop it, and I work with survivors. So I know that quite recently it was alive and well. And there's also the mass brainwashing that we receive every day that indicates that, well, I don't know what it is, but it's very obvious. It's becoming more and more obvious. There's more and more being shown. There's more and more push to bring Satanism everywhere and to minimize it and to make it commonplace, so that every story that has to do with something, really grave, will be considered another story that can't be true, because look, there's all these good people that are really involved in this. There's a lot happening to, I think I was trained specifically to become a French pop star, you could say. And I think it's pretty obvious when you look at certain pop stars that they have gone through the same kind of training. And that continues. And I was meant to promote the agenda, where it's really all right to be sexual with children. I was, as a child, would be extremely sexualized and give double meaning to every lyric. And as a young adult or as a woman, I would be promoting that it's really so cool to, for a young boy would be so lucky, to be with a woman. So to continue this, to sort of promote this culture that lives within the cult. And it looks like it's alive and well at any rate, even though there's more and more exposure, and there seems to be like a whole lot going on in terms of when there's exposures, there's cover up, and there's false stories, and there's a whole lot going on, obviously. So I don't really know the state, actually, exactly. I just know that people are becoming more and more aware and open to what I have to say. And I think that's really the good news at the end of the day.
All right, thanks for that. Yeah, and I'll just add a bit. Monterey, these cults, these rings are ongoing, I personally believe, from my own research and interviews. And they have fall guys, they have patsies. When anything goes wrong, they sacrifice some people and protect the higher ups. and on and on and on it goes. And people like Jimmy Savile, get protected and nothing happens, and it doesn't all come out until he's no longer with us. All right, so Kieran, do you think most world leaders are aware of all this? Personally, I think they're bloody enabling it, if not participating in it.
Yeah, it's a program for world leaders. There's a certain level, there's a hogging of resources, and I think at the end of the day, no one can really control another person. That's the insanity of it all is that you can really only control yourself. But these people really lack the ability to control themselves completely, and they are very busy trying to control others. And there is an agenda that I think most people that come into this become slaves, right? Puppets, slaves. And the rewards are the rewards of power and status. And so because of the system I described, you kind of, if you're really a good person, don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of successful people that are good people that either steer clear, and the only thing that they have to do is just never talk about this subject, and then you're okay. You can do a lot. You can be creative. You can even in Hollywood, you just don't talk about it. And then there's, I think, a lot of people that are kind of stuck in there as well, that have at one point given in, and then there is material on them, and they have come and shown with their signs, they've have the pictures with the hand over the eye on the magazine cover or whatever when they were made, and then but they may feel stuck, and then there are others that are really perpetuating it. But when you're talking world leaders, I would be surprised if there were any that were not at least very aware, and like Shaun said, if not participating.
So RJ wants to know, do you think the depravity of SRA will sink Western society, or do you see a sincere, hopeful future for us? And a lot of people are asking what can they do to ensure a positive future?
Absolutely. And I don't think that it'll sink the Western society, but I think now the veils are being torn off this, probably, centuries old secrets, that everything is being shown, everything is being shown. And again, for me, the hope is that when I started speaking in 2013, the reactions were on a much, let's say, lower consciousness level, if you will. And the disbelief was also much greater. And increasingly, there is room. There is a lot of, it's very important for those that want to support this and that have controls over whether it's social media or YouTube, or the ways in which we communicate generally, to keep everything quiet about me. And to the point that even my follower account, like on Instagram, for example, was being controlled so that I would show to have less followers than I normally would have, except I don't even have that many followers. It kind of shows the level at which they're tinkering with things and with perception. But I don't mind being not very well known, and because I know that I do reach people, and it's more of a person-to-person thing. I don't know how many people have heard me and other survivors speak and are becoming aware of it, but I hear every day people that have heard something, and then they had to accept it, and they've gone through. So I think what we're needing, and where the hope lies, is in each one of us, that when you become aware of this, there might be a process to even really absorb this and accept it, because a lot of people don't really necessarily see the world as it is, and are, the brainwashing is extreme and severe, and so we're all brainwashed. So it's the level, trauma is the greatest mind control tool, And so as long as we're traumatized, um, there, people react differently to trauma, but trauma also creates blind spots in us. And in the network, I was even trained to find blind spots in people, to use them, because that creates a weakness in a person. But those blind spots in general, in all of us, are used to be filled up with what is essentially mind control or brainwashing. So I think that we need to heal ourselves from any trauma that we may have experienced, whether it is deeply personal trauma or it's trauma that it's really come from the outside in, from society. There is just so much that has happened in the last years that was very traumatic for a lot of people. And the healing of that trauma, the healing of the fear of death, I think is the work that we all have to do, so that each person changes our own level of consciousness, so that we overcome our own fears, so that we cannot be controlled anymore, so that we cannot be fooled so easily anymore. And that is the hope. I think the hope lies in each person to, it's like you say, everybody wants peace, right? But who is truly peaceful within themselves? I know somebody wrote that, but I can assure you that I'm not always peaceful at all. I have to work on myself just like everybody else.
Got a question from Professor Hamamoto, who's a great friend of the channel, about the singer Sylvie Vartan. Let me get a picture of her up.
Sylvie Vartan. Yes, I can't
That's it,
say.
yeah.
I can't say. Yeah. I can't say exactly. And I was personally trained to become more like, the cool singer. I mean, a lot of these, I don't know her very well, so you'd have to sort of observe a little bit, and you asking the question, maybe you can answer the question yourself. But I was literally trained to become natural looking. So I had somebody do my hair. I was for a few weeks, I was put in a situation with an entourage, and so they were doing my hair, but my hair had to look natural. So now my hair really is natural, and it doesn't look so good. But then when they do your hair, it looks natural. It falls a certain way that still looks natural, like you just rolled out of bed. But I was at 9 and 10, they put makeup on me, and then my hair looked natural. And it was to be the sort of sultry, super cool Serge Gainsbourg crowd, and that Jane Birkin was sort of an example of that type of singer and actress who ends up being super cool. And I was going to be younger version and a little bit more classic, with singing more classic songs and singing in 5 languages and things like that. But I can't say for specific people, unless maybe I saw them, and then it would still not be my place to out them. Yeah, that thing about the peace within ourselves is that, how do we create peace in the world? How do we, stop the war? Not, maybe never on Earth, but at least we have to work on finding peace within ourselves. If we have arguments all over the place, then we can't then go out and say, I want world peace. You have to start with yourself. That's just what I want to say. Does it
Getting
help
asked
you?
does it help you to share your story?
Generally, it's not healing or anything like that, because I wouldn't hopefully share anything that I haven't healed, because I wouldn't be able to be eloquent about it. But I enjoy it. I enjoy sharing, and I don't mind repeating things, and I enjoy sharing with people, and I enjoy the connection of sharing. Absolutely.
So Tiger Lamb is asking about the rituals. Were they SRA? Is there anything you can describe without getting too graphic?
Well, as I said, in the first years, what I observed was that not because Paul van der Boeinans, who was then the Minister of National Defense, who was also the head of this group in Belgium, was definitely not a believer. He had started out as a butcher, so he came from the middle class, and he was definitely not a believer in anything. So he was sadistic, but not believer. And when I was pushed into the global arena, you could say, that was definitely a belief system with those particular rituals as well that are, of course, absolutely gruesome. And that belief system, I like to describe the psychology of, psychopathy, and how that belief system ends up justifying that sickness, because that's really what it is. The reversal comes from that. I don't, I know people have to make choices in their lives, but most of the people that I saw, that I came across, they were definitely themselves victimized as children. I don't think you are magnetized to do anything like that unless you have it in you. It's been put in you, and once it's been put in you, what this group offers is the sort of most raw way to unburden yourself from all the consequences, as was said here. As you can't, healing is the only way to really allow it to leave you. So when it doesn't leave you during the abuse, you are completely helpless, powerless, confused. And in that moment, you are completely dominated by someone who has power, because they're bigger than you. They're much bigger usually. And, you have fight, flight, freeze. You can't fight, you can't run. And there's nothing conscious happening in a trauma state, by the way. Everything gets reduced. So generally you freeze, and then in that freeze state, you have all these hormones that just fill your body, that help your blood flow more slowly, and you're actually not feeling pain. That's the point. As if you were in nature and you were being bitten by an animal, the blood flow will stop you from bleeding out, and the hormones will help you not feel the pain. So when you go in a freeze state, when your life is in danger because a big person suddenly does something that is wrong, and every fiber of your being knows that is wrong, and you feel that fear of death in that moment, then the freeze state will actually add to the confusion that is already there. No child can ever think that they did not deserve this, for example. So now you feel like you deserve this, and you are not innocent anymore, because now, through the exchange of energy, you now feel that you deserve this. So obviously you're not good and you're not innocent, but the only way that you can now feel lovable, or feel that you can get attention, is through putting out. So it starts the cycle of exploitation, where those people that are grabbing everything and are so greedy, that child abuse ends up being the source of all of their actions, trying to get rid of it, trying to dominate, trying to have status to replace self-esteem. And in the process, the group that I was involved in, they were Luciferians, and it was about, Aleister Crowley, those teachings. But I haven't looked too much at it, but I know that they really believe, for example, the do as thou wilt comes from there, and do as thou wilt seems like it's freedom. And I do believe that every perpetrator in the moment is seeking freedom from the shame that was put on them in the moments when they had no choice. when they had no freedom. You know, the least freedom you have is when in the moment that you're being perpetrated upon. So this state, and to try to get out of that, it offers the most raw way of now being in the place of power when you were so powerless, and feeling the discharge of the domination gives you this sense of discharge and momentary freedom from it. And I think that becomes the addiction, really, the addiction to power. And the whole of that, you know, like, do as thou wilt, why would it end up being doing harm, doing so much harm? And even with taking lives, you know, the child that is in these circumstances, when you lose hope that you'll ever be heard or seen, then a little part of you dies. And when all hope is lost, then the only way to feel alive would be in a moment where you see that outside of yourself, and you see that same type of process that ends in a death in another person. And that's how you start to feel alive in the moment. And again, that's what causes this kind of addiction to power, and that everything is a symbolic act, and it comes from within. It has nothing, you know, the religion just justifies it all.
All right, we've got a question from Crow Oath. What do you think is the biggest misconception or blind spot the public has about these cults, and how can we help address them?
Yes, I think patiently is the answer, because there's a lot of work being done, obviously, to prevent disinformation from really being known. And so there's a lot of misinformation out. So each person needs to be able to, again, navigate from within to feel what is right and what is false. And it is easy to put it aside, because obviously most people have blind spots about their own shadow. Because their own shadow, what does it come out to? Their trauma, their pain, their unresolved issues. That's what creates blind spots. So it's easy to, when we're talking about this subject in general, when we're talking about SA in general, people are already not really wanting to know it, because it is so prevalent, truly. So many people, so many children are exposed. It's very prevalent, and of course, there's a lot being done to even make it more prevalent and to take away. There's really nothing known about trauma and trauma healing, including in the field of psychology. Very little focus is put on trauma and understanding trauma, and understanding the nature of trauma, and understanding the source of symptoms. Very little focuses, and that is, of course, there is an agenda behind that. So I think it's personal to each. So when people have a revulsion, or when they don't want to accept it, it's because there's something in them. So the way to go about addressing it is very patiently. You know, there's a lot of people that are not ready, and then when they're not ready, then you can't really, you have to be patient. And meanwhile, there's more and more popping up everywhere to help people understand. I think I'm actually writing a book with a group of people. I did a workshop in Los Angeles, and we stayed together, and we are creating a book together to actually help people accept this, because I do believe that this is the key to change. That when you get to this subject, you know, you've gotten to the bottom of why things are not working, why politicians cannot create change, why nothing is getting better. I think this is the key answer to why. So if enough people accept and understand it, I do think it will create the biggest change. Because if you know, most people are already aware that politicians are corrupt, but I don't think we're most people want to accept just exactly what they do behind closed doors.
You got a few people asking for your thoughts on Hollywood and their role in this and controlling the masses, normalizing things.
Well, it seems rather obvious in every movie. I can't even watch movies anymore because of the programming in them. So I lived in LA and I worked in Hollywood as a just surviving and menial jobs. So I was like a receptionist, or I was a temp as a sort of an assistant type. And so what I noticed there was a lot of very traumatized people, and again, a lot of SA that I could tell, CSA, and um, and it was so dysfunctional. I actually was naturally drawn to it because I felt rather at home, even though I was never at any party and I was never in the higher circles where things might get really wrong. The atmosphere is so familiar, was so familiar. And, I saw, for example, assistants getting completely screamed at by their bosses. And then that was the way to, for that. And then I saw that particular assistant who was just taking all the abuse, then become powerful themselves, and then they were doling it out. And that was how that system worked. Nobody expected anybody to behave well, especially. Um, so again, I think that there's really good people in Hollywood. I met a lot of nice people, very nice people who were completely blind. But it's also the system itself, right? The system, you get programmed as a person in the public, of which those cults, they completely look down on all of us, just to be clear. They have a superiority complex and look down on us, and we're not even whatever. Sort of like their projection on us is what is really in themselves, like not even quite human, and that is actually the projection on us then. And there's I just got confused with the message that was popping up, but there's good people, and there's a lot of people that are completely unaware and that are very brainwashed, programmed to look up to the celebrities who are and famous people, but also very wealthy people who get what I call the mantle of power, which is all about PR. It's all about presentation. And this mantle of power really prevents most people from seeing the truth about that person. But I say, if you were in the room without any projection with these people, you would find very quickly that they would not be able to socialize normally. They would not be able to, you would see very quickly that these are extremely dysfunctional people and extremely sick, really, because is what they are. And this mantle of power protects that and gives this, an illusion, gives us an illusion of a person that doesn't exist. And these power projections, so I teach a workshop, and I do want to invite people because I just started a new workshop. I developed a modality, a healing modality based on power projections. So when you look up to someone, you project power onto them. You're actually projecting, the projection has to do with your own unresolved trauma, with someone from your own past, an authority figure from your own past. So what this network does is it presents us with authority figures that are celebrities, that are politicians, and these authority figures we're invited to project up on. But it doesn't matter if we project down on them. All that matters is that we ourselves don't have an internal balanced power system. So the model encourages each person to use our projections of power that we may have on different people and to use them as an entry into our own unresolved stuff. And then, to create that healing from within. And we just started a new workshop, which is 10 weeks, and it's online. And there's a forum online. There's a lot of people that have found, because of their integrity, that suddenly, their life was uprooted because of, their values, or, just setting their foot down. And then this sort of came face to face with that kind of brutality that this power structure really is about. And I, I, I think it's a great course. There's a lot of resources that are offered in the course. There's questionnaires, and it's for everyone. It's not. It's for survivors, of course. It's for providers, definitely, but it's for anyone that is interested in creating change. So I do invite you to look up the workshops on my website, where you can find the Shifting the Power course that I'm teaching right now with my partner, and you may find it very, very helpful.
Yeah, and Anneke's website link is in the description box if you're watching on YouTube. I'll put it in the live chat again now as well. You've got a lot of questions coming in asking about your spirituality.
Okay, sure.
They're asking, what are your thoughts on Christianity, God, spirit world, etc. Just like a cluster of them. So if you've got a general answer about your spirituality.
Okay, so I had a near-death experience, and that was, before I was rescued. I mean, during the rescue, it wasn't just, okay, now there's negotiation and now you're out. It was much more involved. And that is very described in great detail in my book. But I did have a near-death experience, and I saw a teacher or a being, and I didn't even know if that was male or female, but I just saw the wisdom of all the worlds and the twinkling in the eyes, you could say. It was just a beautiful and glorious experience that then I ended up recognizing in the figure of Paramahansa Yogananda. So I followed that path, which really is self-realization fellowship, really is a combination of original Christianity and original yoga, that seeks to help us to find direct experience of the divine, that everything comes from within. So the meditation is like, you could say, is listening to God, and prayer is speaking to God. And the practice is very specific. It's to help speed up your spiritual evolution by going through the inner spine with a specific technique, going through the inner spine to speed up your evolution, in that normally you take a year through the zodiac, and 6 and 6 over the months of the year through the zodiac, and then in the spine you go through the chakras 6 and 6 down, and that speeds up your spiritual evolution. I mean, that is saying a lot. That is one technique, but there's, of course, it's a whole way of being. I think most important for spirituality is one's behavior. There's obviously a lot of false gurus and a lot of false teachers in yoga, and I'm not talking about physical yoga now, hatha yoga, which I also do, but the spiritual yoga is really the practice of meditation, and it is also devotion to the divine. And for Christianity, I think it is original Christianity. I do get a lot of comments from Christians often that feel that I'm not a real Christian. So I'd like to, counter with that I don't think Christ would ever say anything like that. That the all the great religious leaders, really, all the prophets and the avatars and the Christs, they are fully enlightened beings that are very present today. And it is for us, I think, to reach their state of consciousness. And I think that's what Christ was even saying, for us to become still first in body and mind, to go beyond and reach the truth from within ourselves, and find that divinity within. And that's the practice. And I can speak nicely about it, but the practice itself is every day. And I just hope to I do my best. I do my best, and The importance for me is that there really is no dogma, that it's not about blindly believing and then following an authority figure and or an intermediary like a priest and having to do whatever the priest says, which is, we know there's so much that's happened in the church and and through and all the the dark ages, you could say, that I think we are moving towards an age where it's about personal experience and knowing and truly knowing rather than believing.
So Annie's asking about whether you've contacted other survivors. And I was listening to Anneke's YouTube channel where she interviews other survivors. So you can go over there, link in description box. I'll put it in the live chat. And you've had a few people ask about your brother as well. Is your brother okay?
So I actually work with survivors. I'm a counselor. And so from my experience of healing, I work with other survivors. So I've actually met a ton of survivors. And even through that work, have learned a lot about the current structure of the network, or I've really understood a lot more about how it really works from all the different survivors that I've met. Hundreds, really, I've spoken in depth with hundreds of survivors, and also have contact with several other survivors. And yes, then my own podcast is interviewing mostly survivors or people around survivors. And so my stepfather let my mother do everything she wanted with me, and he kind of didn't want to get involved. So my brother was not taken to the network, and I think that was because my stepfather might have, that was his son, might have done something. My brother is alive and well, and we have hardly any contact.
How far back can you trace the network?
From what I saw when I was a child, from the people who were in that culture, from the nobility, and some of the places where I was tortured, I would say it's definitely, it felt Middle Age. It felt like it was from the Middle Ages. I was literally locked in a dungeon once, and not a dungeon in the house, in a house, but a dungeon that was medieval. So I think it's very old. That's all I can say. I mean, the Sade was writing pretty much openly about these things. That was, that was in the 18th century. So there are a lot of records, I think, but it's just, it seems that history, the way history is written, the children are always removed from it, but the children are very much a part of it. And I think that even the culture around children has changed tremendously, because we know how prevalent abuse was in the previous ages, just because people didn't understand children. Like, people in this group are often behind because they treat children as adults, but that's how children were generally treated when, in former centuries. So I think it's very, very old, but obviously I can't say how old.
Yeah, these elite bloodline rituals go back thousands of years. Question, have you been able to integrate your memories to your everyday self?
Well, yeah, largely, absolutely. That's why I am who I am today. If you would have met me when I was 20 years old, maybe there's a core self that is there, but and I was mostly in program all the time and responding. And so yes, the integration of the memories is really the healing. And every time an integration happens, there is an internal real change that happens that helps me then to see the world differently, with different eyes, that helps me understand better, behave better, and it helps people see me differently as well. So yes, thank you.
Book wants to know, who was the main culprit of all what you went through?
Well, there were several prominent perpetrators, and then there were some people that I met that were maybe not, but they were I could tell they were very powerful in this group. So I'm not really sure who the main culprit is. It's a system that is extremely hierarchical, and I don't really know who or what is at the top.
Do you know
Although,
how?
although I can say this, that during those rituals, that um, I saw people transform, that they really did not look like human anymore. They didn't look, I mean, they didn't change. They didn't change, but their face was just unrecognizable. So it did feel like they allowed themselves to become possessed in these, through all the drugs and everything that was happening, that were being asked really to be possessed and used as vehicles for what I would say dark vibratory um, entities to come through and have experiences that you can only have through a human body. So that I saw. So there is, you know, as far as Satanists, and I don't think of Satanists, I think of Satanists, the delusive force of our, you know, dualistic world in general, but specifically there are beings, yeah, that, and again, I don't know who's at the top of the hierarchy or what, but that I did see that. So there was definitely a worshiping of Satan.
Do you know how your friend Peggy, the survivor, is doing now?
Yes, unfortunately, Peggy continues to have a very hard time. Um, yes, and I cannot say very much about it, unfortunately, but she is with us. She's still going through, it's been a few weeks now that we've had contact, but she is still suffering greatly.
What happened to the investment banker Roland? He was invited into the club but revolted in disgust when he found kids were involved. He said approximately 8,000 people are Illuminati.
Yes, Ronald Bernard. Ronald is his name, not Roland. Yes, I met him in Holland, and I actually don't know. We're not really in touch, but I think he's mostly focused on a new banking way, and that he's mostly focused on that. And then his English is poor, so he does most of his things in Dutch.
Okay, and let's see. I think we've got through nearly all the questions. Oh, here we go. How many people do you think were unalived while you were there?
So my personal experience, dozens, so lots. And we're saying people, so we're talking about preemies to adults.
How does a normal memory differ from a traumatic memory? Much love.
Well, a normal memory lives in a different part of your brain, first of all. So traumatic memory, I call it intuitive memory, because when you start recalling these traumatic events, you're never going to remember them the way you remember a normal memory. Because of the fear level, and time condenses sometimes. So you may be the reason that I have such detailed memories is because your actually time seems to condense because of the level of fear and the survival state that you get into, which is, you know, a part of our animalistic self, but it's has nothing to do with our prefrontal cortex or our memory centers. So when it does then come back, you can go into every little detail. And for me, these details are about the interactions that occurred and the words that were said. So it's very different. It's never even remotely similar. And that is why I think so many people have trouble believing it also, because it does not, when you start getting these flashbacks, you don't want to believe that they're true. And then, of course, later on, and other people also don't believe you, but um, when you're recovering a memory, it's especially it needs a lot of care and time, because it's very important to allow all the parts to come in to say not believe that it's true also, and give that room as well. And it's sort of looking to accept the thoughts and feelings around these memories that are coming in. And it's really beautiful work, though, when you're working with people in these situations that are um, feeling a level of connection and safety, so that things can come forward. And that is really a beautiful thing, to be connected in something that someone may have been alone with for their whole life and never really found an ear for. And then suddenly there's it. I find it more beautiful than anything, really, that work of working with survivors.
Nancy wants to know, did you ever find out what happened to the man that saved you and told you to live life?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yes, that man was a gangster, and his name was Patrick Amers. He was one of the perpetrators, and he was a gangster who killed many people. He didn't tell me to live life. He told me what I should do to survive. And those were very helpful instructions that really went against that discard program that I had received. So, thanks to those instructions, I really was able to stay alive. Um, but he was, so he made a deal with the politician, Paul van den Boenans, and um, he now had, I was his weak spot. So he went to work for the politician in exchange for my life. 15 years later, that politician got in trouble for fiscal fraud. You can look that up if you want. Paul van den Boenans, Belgian politician, twice prime minister, got in trouble for fiscal fraud and was sentenced to 3 years in jail. That was suspended, actually, for his services to the state. But he was in trouble, and his name was in disrepute. And he really wanted to become mayor of Brussels. That was what he wanted to do in his old age. And because of this, he couldn't, because his name was in disrepute. He could not. He went into appeal for the charges, and then was kidnapped and disappeared for a month. He came back, and so this is the head of the network, Paul van den Boenans, the politician. He came back after being kidnapped a month in 1989, and he had lost weight. He was wearing sunglasses because he said he had been chained to a wall in a basement, and he had been made to eat yogurts and couldn't eat anything else. And you know, and he had the most popular press conference of all history of Belgium upon his return from um, yeah, from his kidnapping, and the charges were dropped, and his name was restored. He ran for mayor and lost the race, and then some very zealous cops got on the heels of Patrick Amos, the gangster who rescued me from the network. They caught up with him in Brazil. He was imprisoned in Brazil for a year and then extradited to Belgium, where he spent 3 more years in prison. There was a trial where he came out and said he was ready. He wanted to talk to some people. He wanted to say some things. The trial was suspended, delayed, and before his trial happened, he was well. It looked like he had killed himself, or it was the official story, and he hung himself from a foot high radiator. He was 6 feet tall, and well, anyway, he died in this way.
Wow. Good grief, Anneke. My mind is absolutely blown. I mean, we spoke to you several years ago for about an hour, and it was a really harrowing, graphic, hard-hitting account. But today, it's been so much more comprehensive. What you've told us today, I've learned so much from you. Really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the viewers for all the respect, love, and support you give to Anneke in the chat. And thank you for all your wonderful questions, fascinating questions. Is there anything you'd like to say, Anneke, for the viewers who've been watching this live for 2 hours with us now?
I want to thank everybody for being here. And also, yes, I want to say the same. Thank you so much for the questions and for your willingness to look at this with open eyes and your desire to spread the word. So I'm very grateful for you, and I hope that that you found this helpful. Thank you.
All right, huge thank you to you, especially. I'm going to close the show. I'll let you have a little bit of rest before we go and get some food and stuff. So you chill out for a little bit, and I'll speak to you shortly. Thank you, Anneke.
Sounds good. I'll see you soon. From your upstairs to your downstairs.
Oh, what an absolutely amazing woman, folks. And huge thank you for joining us tonight. Please share this far and wide. Anneke's story is so important. And also, if you want to get the book, we have got all those links in the description box. We've also got the YouTube channel for Anneke. If you did miss the part 1 that we did, that link is also in the description box as well, that we did several years ago. But I know many of you are probably new to seeing Anneke as well, unless you saw on Patrick, but David, etc. And what we got coming up next? We have got on October the 15th at 7 p.m. I'm going to be talking to Dr. Roman Yampolsky about whether AI is going to cause human extinction through either a deadly virus, what jobs are going to be eliminated, how superintelligence can dominate humanity, will it trigger a global collapse, could it be worse than nuclear war, and are we living in a simulation? So something a little bit different. You may have seen him on Diary of a CEO. That's October 15th at 7 p.m. And then we have also got French model Laurie Marsden exposing elite, including Jean-Luc Brunel and Epstein. And that is on October 24th at 11 a.m. because of the time difference where she's at. But we are working on many more broadcasts coming your way soon. So yeah, huge thank you everyone. Please support Anneke. Again, here's the links. I'll put them in the live chat for the book, for the website, and for Anneke's YouTube channel. And if you are watching this on replay, those links will be in the description box, and I'll also put them in the pinned comment as well. You'll find them there.